So just a little bit of history of kind of where we've been and where we're going. About middle of 2021, that moved on to the village board for its review and eventual adoption. Throughout that process, there were multiple meetings like this with public information, also meetings just of the regular village board with comment available. And after much kind of revision and conversation, that moved into an adoption process that ended end of last year with the comprehensive plan getting adopted. So the comprehensive plan is kind of a vision and goals statement for the village. And then the work really begins at that point to try and make those real through policies, laws, whatever else, kind of approach is needed for implementing those goals. This committee was then tasked with the zoning piece of that, right? So there is a lot in the comprehensive plan that talks about land use, how we use the land in the village, around housing, around commercial use, and so forth. And this committee started working on a project to, to make revisions to the zoning. And as this committee kind of started its work, we quickly realized that in and of itself is another 3+ year project, and wanted to break it into smaller chunks for earlier feedback from the community, and for better feedback from the community. Trying to review a 100+ page document with lots of changes everywhere is kind of overwhelming, and you end up getting less feedback and less meaningful feedback for that reason. So this committee is now looking at primarily the residential changes, the residential sections of the zoning, and looking to take that on as the first project for adoption and for change. And that's kind of what's brought us here today. So now there is a proposal from this committee that looks at the goals laid out in the comprehensive plan, and I can talk about those briefly, and attempts to make those goals into reality via zoning. So this is a proposal. This is still very much in the place of getting feedback from the community, from the boards, from our lawyer and so forth, to see if we've accomplished those goals that we've laid out in the comprehensive plan, and if we need to adjust something, make those adjustments, and kind of continue to iterate on this proposal. If at some point this committee feels that we've heard all the feedback, we've incorporated the feedback that makes sense to incorporate, this committee will then send that proposal to the village board, and then the village board starts its whole process of revision and adoption as well. That process can grow and shrink depending on how much conversation there is at the village board level, but this board doesn't have the power in any way to pass any zoning. That is purely up to the village board. So the village board would then make any changes they felt necessary when they felt the proposal was in a good spot for that. That would then get reviewed through an environmental review, a formal review process that any law in the village needs to go through with a public hearing and so forth. And that's another few months process. So, if this committee were to decide, in the next few weeks to send this along to the village board, it would still likely end up being in December at the very earliest, before any adoption could happen. My suspicion is it won't move that quickly, and we're looking at early next year at the earliest, potentially later, depending on how much conversation there is. I think that covers kind of the arc of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. I did want to mention briefly about kind of what are the goals of the proposal. What are we trying to aim at, and have we actually accomplished that? So in the comprehensive plan, under housing, and I think that's kind of the appropriate piece for this section, is a number of goals. And I'll just read them off. So there's one goal to provide for more affordable rental housing. There's a number of actions under there, and I won't get into it, but it does kind of give a little more clarity on what that might look like. There's a goal for providing more affordable for-sale housing. And there's a goal to preserve small town atmosphere. And a final, actually two other ones. One, to regulate short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts fairly. That's an interesting one and is the next topic of conversation for this committee, but we decided to move ahead with the housing pieces as a chunk. And then the short-term rental regulation, I expect this committee will continue working through maybe the rest of the year and early next year. We'll see how quickly that moves. But that is a current point of conversation for this committee. And then finally, to promote accessibility in all buildings. And there's, again, a couple of suggestions on how that might look. So those are the goals that, it kind of shaped the approach that this committee took, and the proposal that's going to come before you and that we can chat about. And I think I'll kind of maybe leave it